How long ago was it that you last read the Damnation game?
Oh, only about a month or 6 weeks ago or something. No, it's probably two or 3 months ago. So that's fine. But I just remember when I sort of was doing the piece for Gavin at Kendall Reviews that you said, "Oh, come and have a chat at some point." And then
oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, any excuse to talk about anything Clive Barker. To be perfectly honest, I mean, have you listened to the conversations I've done with Kit?
No, I've not. I should do.
We did Weave World very early on. I think that was one of our very, very first chats, and we spoke for about 3 hours about that. And then we did it, and then we did a Magica, and in Magica's another very, very, very long chat. I think it's like 4 hours, that one. Yeah, utterly ridiculous because we just couldn't stop, Yeah.
No, that's fair, dude.
Just the depths of those books. We just kept peeling and peeling and dissecting. And by the end, we basically had a thesis between us on Barker and his metaphysics. It's just utterly crazy.
Awesome.
So, like, what's your background with Barker? How did you come to him?
Oh God, this was years ago. So I'm somewhere in my mid-40s now. So I got introduced to Barker back at college. I used to knock around with my mate Phil. And Phil was sort of dabbling in filmmaking, and he sort of vaguely introduced me to horror through Stephen King, like most people back in the mid-90s, whatever.
Of course.
But then he was sort of like, "Oh, do you want to? I fancy filming some of these, something from Books of Blood, sort of doing some adaptations and things, like those things you do when you're 17."
Of course, yeah. And Barker certainly did, by all accounts.
He did. He's talented, much more talented than me. But
you know what? I think that's okay. When it's Clive Barker, it's all right. I mean, you read the stuff that he was doing at like 17, and you're like, oh, for fuck's sake! Honestly, it's insane, isn't it?
Oh, it's ridiculous, and it's just one of those ones where you just kind of go, how do you have so much talent in the first? Because Books of Blood was what I read first of Barker's, and you just kind of go, you just don't realise that that's the pinnacle. You sort of think, wow, this is amazing, and then you start to read others, and you just they other really, really, really good stuff, but you just sort of realise that Barker's just on that extra level, really.
He's somewhere else, isn't he? I mean, I reread the Books of Blood for those Kendall reviews that we did, and I honestly, I was again like just flabbergasted all over again. I just could not believe the level that he's operating at. The fact that they still feel revolutionary. These were published in the 1980s, right?
Yeah.
They still feel like they are deviant and transgressive, and like there's very little like them out there still.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's one of those ones. I think we've all. I mean, I know. When I started off writing and dabbling, you try and emulate, and you just kind of go, it's a very pale imitation, and then I realised, no, that's not where my writing's going. I'll do something else. But in terms of reading Barker, it's one of those ones. It's something like. I mean, Dread's the one that sticks with me. Dread's the one you just go. It's very simple, but it's the piece in the when she's in the room with the meat and the meat's gone rancid, and it's been for a few days, and then eventually she has a nibble, and that's the key bit within Dread for me, and it still sits with me, 30 odd years later, having read that then, and that was just brilliant piece of writing. And then you have what's in the hills, the cities, if I've got the title right. You just kind of go, how on earth do you have a concept like that as a story that works?
Where did it come from? That's the thing, isn't it? Like, how did he even conceive of that imagery? I mean, like in the hills, the cities, I've never seen anything like that in anything else. The concepts that he comes up with in that story. And also, I mean, bearing in mind, it's a story that has two gay protagonists in the 1980s, right? I mean, how did he get away with this stuff? It's incredible. It's amazing.
Well, this is the stuff. See, I'm sort of naive to all of that because I just read it and I just went, that's the way. I mean, I grew up near Brighton, so it's one of those ones, maybe it was just a slightly more liberal part of the
Yeah.
closer. So it was just one of those ones where I just read it and I didn't think anything about it because I'm young and naive. And then you get older, you suddenly realise there's a load of homophobic idiots out there. I think that's the polite way of putting it. And then you just kind of go, I mean, fair play. He just went, you know what, I'm going to write it and we'll go with it. But it's also that I don't know. You can debate this. I'm sure there's been many podcasts that have debated it. But you look at Barker and then you look at King and you go, and they're both, you know, at the top of their game. But how come Barker's been hugely successful, but he's not seemed to break out into wider consciousness, and maybe he's more extreme to a degree without, you know, it's not extreme horror, but the concepts aren't so familiar to people as it might be. So maybe I
think you're absolutely right. There's a tendency. I mean, Barker's work is just more. It is more deviant, isn't it? It's more transgressive in so many ways. Not just in terms of the imagery, but the concepts that he plays with. He takes his stories to levels and to degrees that are so out there, so abstruse. I think sometimes it does alienate people who are looking for something maybe more traditional or more down the line, as it were. Which is why, like, the Damnation game is such an interesting subject. I mean, for people who are coming to Barker from, say, more mainstream horror, the Damnation game is actually a pretty good way in.
It's a great way in, but it's one of those ones I'd completely forgotten about this until I reread it, and then you've got that bit in the basement. And it sort of goes down into the basement, and then you sort of sees what Breer's sort of been doing down there, and you just go, how did that get published in a mainstream book? It's one of those bizarre things, because when I was, back when I was 16, 17 reading it, and then rereading it, you know, earlier this year, it never really impacted me back then, or not that I remember. And I don't know if it's because I was younger and closer to the age of the victim and all of that sort of piece. But then it's, you know, being older, and I'm a parent now and all of those sort of things. And I went, that's quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's some stuff in this book, isn't there? I mean, Barker's always uncomfortable, but it doesn't matter where you come in to Barker, that he's always going to distress you in some particular way. But some of the imagery in this book in particular, because it is so much more, in terms of its setting, it's more mundane than the others. It's a lot more mundane than, say, Weave World or Imagica, which goes off into these like wonderlands, you know, these incredible realms of imagination. This one is set directly in the dirt and the filth of suburbia, isn't it? You know, and urban environments. It feels very real, more so than the others. And as a result, the imagery is just so much more stark. It's so much nastier. The impact of it is so it's so profound. The opening, you know, where you've got who we later discover to be Joseph Whitehead going through Warsaw, and he talks about the stuff that's happening in not even post-war Warsaw. It's just at the end of its bombing, of its shelling, right? And the things that he describes that go on there, just as a matter of course, the human horrors that before there's anything, even any note of the supernatural happening here, are utterly repulsive. It's unbelievable. Like, the cynicism of this book is so stark.
Yeah, he's just gone, I think, from the off. He's just kind of gone, just, you know, screw taboos. We'll just get it out on the page. If you're not interested after the first 20 pages, then you know it's not the book for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the fact that he goes there right from the off. You know, he's going for human horror right from the off. Not in contrast, a lot of the stuff that Mamoulian is capable of doesn't really mean very much, and I think that's very deliberate in this book. I think it's very deliberate. There is, like, all the way through this theme of demystification, it seems to me. Like, you've got Mamoulian, who is essentially like kind of the Mephistopheles character of this book. He is the supernatural agent, the temptator. And at the beginning of the book, when he's first introduced, you do believe that. It's sort of like he's represented as this mythical entity. He can perform legitimate miracles. You know, he can bring things back to life. He can perform miracles. And then the book goes out of its way to absolutely demystify him and tear him down. It shows you the human being behind all of the mystification, and he's nothing. Ultimately, he is nothing and no one underneath it all. He doesn't even understand what he's got. Like, the miracles that he can perform mean nothing to him. They've done nothing for him. He is just this empty shell of a creature. And I think, it's so dark. It's so incredibly unpleasant.
Yeah, and I think unpleasant not in terms of the imagery to a degree, but to a large degree actually. But I think it's the unpleasantness. It's the characters within there. I mean, particularly Whitehead, and it's just that it's all about power plays, and who's pulling what puppet strings, and and to what end, and it's almost that. I think it's almost that metaphor of the rich versus poor sort of thing. Whitehead just sort of seems to be, I'm really rich, I just do whatever I want to do with Marty because I can. I bought him off, that's fine. And Mamoulians was sort of Whitehead is like, okay, so I'll sort of try and pull your strings because I have the power over you because I've given you, all this access to wealth and stuff for your talents, and particularly with his, that Mamoulian's use with Breer as well. It's that thing of which is an intriguing the background to the Razor Eaters. I never sort of quite got in my head where this sort of tribe is, because it's sort of like being hinted at within the book. But it's just that Mamoulian's just kind of going, right, we'll just do what we want. I'll use you when I need you, and when I'm done, you're right. You can go. I don't care.
Again, it does seem to be a recurrent theme in the book, doesn't it? Like Marty is a really good example of this. So Marty is introduced as the protagonist of this book, but he is almost incidental. In and of himself, it could have been anyone, right? Anyone serving a prison sentence who had gambler's debts. It could have been anyone. That was really the only criteria that Whitehead was going for. Someone who's a little bit lucky at times with their gambling, who has that particular knack, of course. And that's it. Marty himself is utterly incidental in the same way that, as you say, when Mamoulian ultimately tempts Whitehead at the beginning of the book, he's kind of incidental as well. It could have been any chancer, any scavenger, anyone who has this knack with cards or with gambling and this appetite for life. Could have been anyone. Could have been absolutely anyone. And I think you're absolutely right with like Barker's commentary on the nature of the sort of class politics that's going on here. Because this is something again that recurs in Barker all the damn time. Like he has this absolute contempt for acquisitiveness, for materialism, basically. If you look at all the way through Barker's books, the unforgivable characters, the ones who are utterly without redemption, are the ones who encounter miracles, as Whitehead does. Whitehead absolutely encounters proof that there are miracles and magic in the world. And what does he do with it? He uses it to amass material wealth and power. And that's it. That he doesn't see any further than that. And Barker has such phenomenal contempt for that. He finds that absolutely irredeemable. You've got, in Weaveworld, you've got Shadwell, right? The salesman who all he wants to do is sell Wonderland. He doesn't see the miracles of it. He doesn't see the potential of it. He just wants to sell it. All he sees is material worth and power in it. You see it again and again and again. The utter contempt. The thing about the Damnation game for me is that there aren't really that many characters who are not that, who have a redemptive element to them.
Yeah, no, it is. It's because I was just sort of thinking you've got Karis, who's flawed and just hide herself away in the drugs, and she's playing games with Marty. You've got Toy. Bill Toy. He's kind of it's interesting because sometimes you sort of think he's the good guy, but other times he's sort of like, he's doing whatever Whitehead tells him to. He went and plucked Marty from the prison. He's tried to put an arm around Marty, sort of protect him to a degree, but he knows what's going on.
Absolutely.
He's not naive to all of that. And you've got Marty's excuse me, friend, the frog in the throat. Marty's ex-wife and his mate, the dealer, who sort of ends up shacking up with her, and it's just like everyone's just playing off each other. And there's possibly the only redeeming characters, maybe you've got the housekeeper role sort of thing, and the lady stuff with the dogs. But they're such small incidental characters. It almost is if they're there because we need staff here to do these aspects. that needs to happen in the story, but we don't need to do much more with them.
Absolutely. All of the relationships in this story, every single one of them is corrupt in some way, isn't it? it's poisoned somehow. Even those that seem to be intense and passionate in one way, like Whitehead's daughter and Marty, obviously, it seems as though that's going to be a romance at one point, and then of course it's revealed that it's not a romance at all. It's something else. There's a functionality to everything, and that's the world Marty finds himself in, and it's the role he finds himself in all the way through.
Yeah,
just as a functionary.
Yeah, well, that's it. As you sort of said, it's that thing of if you flipped him out and put someone else in, you'd likely think it's going to be the same outcome. There's a bit about him that's got some spark that says, you know what, I'm not going to put up with this. You know, he could have just been subservient if he really wanted to, but he's a boxer by background, isn't he? So he's so it's that thing of, you know, he's got that fight in him, and I think it's that one. If Whitehead had gone and picked someone slightly different, it might have probably gone a bit different.
Absolutely, yeah, because the temptations are all there, aren't they? Again, it's this whole Faust thing, isn't it? I mean, the Damnation game is Faust, ultimately. It's a kind of postmodern Faust, but it takes away the divine element and the infernal element, ultimately, because even though there is magic here, even though there are miracles, there is nothing bigger. I think that's kind of what singles it out as one of Barker's earlier novels, one that came almost directly after the publications of the Books of Blood, because it's so like those stories. It's like a bigger version of one of those stories. There is no gateway through metaphysics to something better here. In fact, the metaphysics in this book is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Like, even when you get the classic Barkerian images of something beyond this world, it's repulsive and foul. The white tree. And the corpses around it, you know, that are animated, that actually move and are engaged in all sorts of repulsive things. This is a Barker book, by the way. Anyone who's listening, this is a Barker book. So, you know, you're gonna. I would put content warnings at the head of this one. If you do go away and read this book, just be warned. You're gonna go through the ringer with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main bit with that is any animal lovers there, and you know you're particularly fond of dogs. Look away at a couple of scenes. It's not going to end nicely for you.
It definitely is not. In fact, children as well. Well, anyone, anything, any. If you have a sensitivity to almost anything, it's probably in this book somewhere.
And yet, bizarrely enough, it doesn't read like an extreme horror novel or anything along those lines, because it touches the themes, but it's I don't want to say the writing elevates it. I don't mean that to say that you can't have well-written extreme horror. So before anyone sort of complains about that,
yes, before disclaimer.
But there's just something, I don't know, in the prose that makes it. You read it, you know, respond to it, react to it, and then you kind of go, right, I'll carry on through, sort of thing. So it's an interesting piece. I mean, particularly so I alluded to it earlier on. You know, the girl in the basement. That basically you find out that Brea's been, you know, however old she is. Let's say somewhere between 8 and 12. And that's really uncomfortable. And it's that piece as well where there's a plate that's in front of her where there's, you know, slices. She's dead in terms of this, but there's slices on a plate with her own flesh, which she's got a knife and fork next to her. And you realise earlier in the book the piece where Mamoulian's fed given Marty this exquisite meat, and you know, at that point you're thinking, because Mamoulian's just gone through the grounds and he's sort of killed the dogs, and you sort of think, okay, it's dog flesh, and you kind of go, okay. But it's the way that Barker just holds that back in reserve for a good 200 pages, and then suddenly you go, fuck.
Holy hell. And it's at that point that's incredibly tense anyway, isn't it? As the reader, you are. It's almost like a classic horror set piece in a way that Barker's now inverting by throwing in his usual sense of deviance, I suppose. You're in the basement of the Razor Eater's house, right? So this guy is the prime force of violence and sadism in this book, and you are afraid for Marty, and suddenly you have this strange, awful, creeping realization of what's actually happening. It's horrific. In fact, it kind of emulates the nausea that Marty himself feels
Yeah, it is. It's I don't know. It's a book that makes you sort of want to, get a bar of soap and rub yourself down with it, sort of thing. It's
it's dirty, isn't it? It is a filthy, squalid, horrible novel, and I say that with all love, by the way, all affection. This is not a condemnation of the book. This is actually it's an incredible endorsement. I always come away from this one. It's oddly one of Barker's books that I've read probably the least for some reason. Not because I dislike it in any way, shape, or form, but maybe it is because of its squalidness, because of its the power of its filth. It takes you through almost every element, every layer of human dirt and excrement that it can, and then some.
Well, it's the bit within that. What I think he quite likes doing. It's the what's the right phrase here? It's the corruption of innocence almost. So if you think around, Marty's part of that to a degree, but from the background, etc. The real thing is you've got the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh my God!
The two lads come along, and they're just basically, have you heard the name of our Lord, etc., and all of that sort of thing. And then Mamoulian just corrupts them and shows them their new God. And it's that thing, and at the end, the very blonde-haired, blue-eyed, all American hero type character who's suddenly going down to whatever levels of depravity he can. Really sort of like, as much filth and feces, blood, all that sort of thing. It's just he's reveling in it, and it's just that thing going that turns really quickly, but it's done really well. And I think Barker's just basically going. I mean, it's called the Damnation game, obviously for the game that Whitehead and Mamoulian are playing, and others are getting dragged into it. But for me, without being too look at how clever I am sort of thing. But it's that thing of kind of going. Well, actually, we're all pretty much damned going through life, and it's so.
I think that's it. I think you've hit the nail absolutely on the head. That is exactly it. I mean, like the game that Mamoulian plays with Whitehead, and which Whitehead then goes on to play with Marty, and which is played all the way through. That's just a microcosm of the wider game that they're all playing, isn't it? Which is life, it's existence, right? It's that there is this overwhelming cynicism to everything in this book. It's basically saying that the game that you're playing is zero sum unwinnable. It's from the moment you're born, the moment you take your first heartbeat, your first cells coalesce, you're playing it and you're losing it. That's the end, It's, I mean, like take Mamoulian, for example. I mean, Mamoulian, when you actually get to see who and what Mamoulian is, how he comes across his capacity for miracles, right?
Yeah.
It's nothing. Ultimately, it is nothing. It's squalid. It's dirty. It's he discovers it almost entirely by chance. It's not because he's some grand seeker or chosen one, or because he's particularly clever or anything like that. It is entirely by chance. He takes it via murder, so it's a squalid act from the very beginning, and he lives for such a long time performing miracles, and it doesn't do anything for him. At the end, ultimately, he's nothing. He's no better off than anyone else is in this situation. And that's a very dark, very unpleasant, cynical message, which interestingly Barker would abandon later on. I mean, that particular cynicism is not something that would really find its way back into his work. I mean, after this, you get books like Weave World and Galilee and Imagica, which, they can get pretty squalid at times, but there's always a redemptive note in those works.
Well, just as we're talking, I was just sort of flicking through the end of the book just to remind myself quite how it closes down. And I was just thinking, there's nothing uplifting at the end. The victory that happens is pretty much a hollow victory. There's no, wow, let's go and take on the world here, I feel amazing. It's just like they survived.
They survived, and even that is a dark thing because they've seen the depths, haven't they? They've seen just the utter squalidness of everything. One of the images that always sticks with me is, I mean, there's a lot of images in this book that stick with me, my God, but one of them is when Mamoulian, spoilers by the way, guys, we're going to assume that you've read this book. when Mamoulion has basically been hacked into tiny bits by the Razor Eater, there's like nothing left of him. And when Marty comes back to the hotel where it's happened, there's little bits of him crawling around like slugs. It's like the imperative to survive, the whatever magic animates and sustains Mamoulion is still in his cells, and it's mindlessly animating him. So again, it's this whole notion of the damnation game. By accepting whatever or stealing whatever miracle Mamoulion has elevated himself by, he's damned himself to this hideous non-existence where he can't even die properly.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, because there's this whole fear of dying and the almost what's beyond within it. It's Whitehead's whole gambit within this is how long can he stay alive for? That's how he wins the game. He stays alive longer than Mamoulion.
Yeah,
he's going. There's all the terrors etc. that Mamoulion can put on him. He goes, you know what? I don't. Well, obviously he's afraid of what's to come of and the tortures that Mamoulion has in place for him in the afterlife and all of those sort of things. But it's just like it's that complete. Mamoulion doesn't want to die. Whitehead doesn't want to die. But at the same time, they're all a bit. What's the point in living?
Yeah, I mean, it's awful, isn't it? And when you really start to analyze this book, there is a truly. It's beyond cynicism. It's almost nihilistic, isn't it? There's a sort of it's an existential nihilism at the heart of humanity that Barker's really commenting on here. Where, and God, this is a really cynical concept, but it is in the book. It is a part of it, just as you said there. It is part that this dichotomy between fearing the grave and yet not wanting to live, realizing that ultimately life is an empty round of constant disappointments and suffering, and yet fearing either the oblivion that comes with death or the notion that there might actually be some continuation, and it's awful. It's not even like a dynamic. It's not eschatological, so it's not like heaven and hell. There's no potential heaven here. It's the afterlife of the white tree, isn't it? And the whatever awful thing that is. it's just vile. I mean, it's a brilliantly vile book. If you really want to, if you want a story that's going to make you feel that squalidness, it's going to make you feel the excrement of humanity down to its very soul, this is a good one.
It is. It's going to tick a lot of boxes for you in that respect.
Yeah.
It's the piece within it. If you think, do you remember the piece where Whitehead gets a few of his business associates and 2 or 3 prostitutes along, and they get martyred, and it's literally Whitehead's right. I'm going to be going away after this, effectively. So I'm just going to be, see what depravities I can get. We'll drink all the fine boozy, all the fine food. We'll have a bit of fun at Marty's expense here, because he's bored. He's just going. I want to do something I've not done. And let's tease this out, have a bit of fun and entertainment. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. And it's back to that thing again. Marty's just an expendable asset to him.
Yeah, absolutely. As everyone is. I mean, everyone is. Again, it's Barker making this commentary upon moneyed classes, right?
Yeah.
The fact that they can experience anything, that they can buy anything, that they can engage in any depravity, and as we know from, many revelations, they do.
Yeah.
They sort of burn themselves. I mean, this is a trope that comes up in Barker all the time. This is Frank Cotton, right, from the Hellbound Heart and Hellraiser. The notion, these people who have done everything, who have experienced everything, and are just bored. They've seen every evil. I mean, Whitehead, I would say, has gone further than Frank has, because of course, he was in Warsaw, right?
Yeah.
He's seen the very heights and depths of what humanity is capable of in terms of cruelty and sadism, and its capacity to enjoy that, to revel in its own feculence and filth. And he is one of the most ruined, depraved characters in Barker, and that's saying something.
You know what? That's a really good point. I never thought about it before, but he is. He's just because he could stop any. Well, if he stops, I suppose Mamoulion gets him. But it's that thing of he's controlling his daughter. He's getting her drugs to keep her controlled. Like, go back to how innocent's toy or not. He's getting those drugs and he's quite complicit in that.
Yeah. And again, it reduces her to the status of a doll, doesn't it? So, like, everyone in Whitehead's world, as we were saying before, they're not just functionaries, they're objects, they're items that he wants to control in very particular ways.
Yeah, he does, and it's interesting. It's hard because he's trying to work out if he cares for his daughter or not, and you think he must do because Mamoulion sort of does that, trying to get at Whitehead through the door through Karis.
Of course, yeah, of course, because she has some slight psychic capability, doesn't she? In the same way that Marty does, actually. I mean, almost all of the characters that Mamoulion is interested in have this. They have a capacity, don't they? It manifests differently. Like for Karis, it's more almost like telepathic. She can sort of perceive things, and whereas with Marty and Whitehead, it's that knack of luck, isn't it? It's being able to predict things and whatnot.
Yeah, it is, and it's that. It's interesting. Yes, maybe that's the tease for Mamoulion. Maybe that's the where he gets his kicks from. So we said maybe Whitehead was he could have been anyone that walked across Warsaw and came to him. But I think there's something specific. I don't know if he sort of says I was waiting for you or something like that. But it was. But I think he says something along those lines.
I think it's like hinted at more than anything. It is this notion that it is mentioned, but it's not. I don't think it's ever like emphasized greatly or too much to any particular degree, but there is something unspoken and unnurtured in Marty that it's like, I think they Whitehead talks to him about it. It's when he feels like the cards burn or fizz in his hand. He just knows. He just knows that it's right, and a lot of the time it doesn't work. It's a delusion, but sometimes, just sometimes, he knows and it works, and that's it.
He does indeed. And I'm just looking at this the piece where they meet for the first time, and it's the piece. So Mamoulion's not really named, as it were. So Pilgrim, the man said, "You found me finally. You found me, surely," the thief replied. It had been as Vasilia had predicted. "You fancy a game or two, I hear. Is that right? Why not?" So there's the power play in there. In fact, you're reading that, and they're dueling already, aren't they? They're having a little back and forth, and you basically the books one big pissing contest between and Whitehead. It
kind of is, and yet at the same time, it's also kind of like there is an element of the dynamic between them that's like long-suffering exes, isn't there? These people who have been in one another's lives forever, and they can't quite quit one another. They should. That would be best for both of them, quite frankly. But they do keep coming back. I mean, later on, when you get some of the flashbacks between Mamoulion and Whitehead, after Whitehead gets married and he starts having a family and whatnot, Mamoulion is not best pleased about that. And in fact, I think the wife doesn't like Mamoulion, does she? She kind of describes him as creepy and weird and wants him out, basically. The wretchedness of Whitehead's rejection of Mamoulion and the way that humanizes Mamoulion, it makes him far less than the mythic entity that he's previously been built up as. It's phenomenally clever. Because again, it's this exercise in demystification. It takes the Mephistopheles and removes the infernal from him and just makes him a very sad, obsessive man, ultimately.
So do you think if they'd had sort of relationship counselling, they might have had a bit of a different outcome? You reckon?
Oh wow! Can you imagine that if they'd actually gone to? Wow! I mean, and also, you have to bear in mind they were together for a long time, and it is hinted at the beginning of the book that Whitehead doesn't really care where he gets his kicks. I mean, it's hinted that. I mean, all as horror again. Trigger warnings, guys. Just it is awful. This book, in so many ways. It's hinted at that he has sampled all the delights, quote unquote, of Warsaw, and that includes, it includes these awful places where you can buy children and men and women and boys and girls and just the awful stuff. Maybe they I don't know. Maybe their relationship was physical at one time. It's certainly intense. It's like emotionally intense anyway.
It is. Yeah, I don't think it was physical because I think if you look at it, Mamoulion's very he doesn't seem to relish physical contact.
That's right. Yes, you're right. He that one of the things between him and Whitehead is that he lives through Whitehead, doesn't he? Sort of like parasitically. It's so weird. Mamoulian's whole shtick is so strange and complex. So he is disgusted by humanity. He's utterly repulsed by the physical processes of humanity, and yet he lives them vicariously through his various patsies, through these people that he seduces. So he's snared in this ambiguity as well, where the thing that he is repulsed by is what ultimately drives him.
Yeah, and it's great because it's weird with that, because he ends up going into Karis's head when Marty and Karis are first having sex, and it's and there's that absolute repulsion of the act.
Yeah.
And it's sort of that strange thing of, you know, why does he want to engage? And it's got to go back to the power thing. But it's interesting because obviously he gets his tools. So you got Anthony Breer, that you got the Razor Eater. You know, he's brought the man back from, he hung himself, I think, if I remember rightly. And
that's right.
Yeah. So he's brought the man back from the dead. And so actually, George, you tell me this: the Razor Eaters. I could never really work out what the Razor Eaters was. It's always sort of saying the last of our tribes. So Mamoulian is the last European, and Breer is the last of the Razor Eaters. And I never know if it's just a mental health issue that Breer's got, or if there's sort of some tribe, or it's more of a hinted at, and you don't need to know any more about it. Like say, you know, there's something like that.
You know, I'm not sure, because it certainly doesn't go into any detail on whether there is like a legitimate tribe. Maybe it's it could just be, I mean, because, you know, Anthony Breer is a mentally unwell person even when he's alive. You know, afterwards it gets even worse, but even when he's alive, he's a mentally unwell person. So it could just be a delusion of some sort. It could just be like a fantastical history or mythology that he's made up in his own head, which is actually quite acute, because again, that's something that serial killers do tend to do. They do tend to mythologize themselves in their own heads. Or it could be that he is simply aware of the sort of history of serial killers and is kind of, in a very obscure, symbolic way, aligning himself in that. I don't really know. I don't think it goes any further than that. All we know is that he has this very odd habit of literally swallowing razors, which he does with some alacrity by all accounts. And also later on, when he's quote unquote dead, of mutilating his own body. He starts like sticking bits through everywhere, like skewers and razors and whatnot, because it doesn't hurt him anymore. Of course, he doesn't really feel anything. I mean, one of the great tricks Barker does play in this book is that he doesn't let on. He doesn't really tell you until much, obviously, you know, because of what's happening to Breer, but he doesn't come out and say to Anthony, "Oh, you are dead." Or to the reader, for that matter, you are dead, and that's why what's happening to you is what's happening to you, until much later on. I think it's Mamoulian who ultimately does say to Breer, isn't it? "Oh yeah, you actually died when you strung yourself up. I did not save you, which is what you thought. It's what I allowed you to think." But it's not what happened.
Yeah, and Breer's just kind of going, "Well, I just keep putting my cologne on because there's this smell I just can't get rid of, and I'm really not quite sure what it is, so I just mask it with a little odor, whatever."
What a detail. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like there. I mean, I say this book is really cynical, and it is. It's phenomenally cynical. It's phenomenally dirty, filthy, excremental in many respects. But there is a sense of humor underneath it. Yeah, it's like, it's gallows. I mean, it's really gallows and dark, and the humor itself is cynical, but it's definitely there.
I think it's one of those ones where. I don't know if we're of a similar age or not, George, but it's one of those ones where you just sort of think, you know, how much is that sort of shaped our, you know, obviously one book's not going to shape your life, but it's just that sort of era. I just remember sort of growing up in the, you know, 80s, early 90s, particularly from the 80s, you were on this it was just grim and miserable, or maybe I just had a crap childhood. I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I was born in the mid '80s, so I was sort more of a child of the '90s. I'm 38 now.
Oh, there you go.
But yeah, and also, I mean, what do you know anything of Barker's own past? Of course,
I know bits and pieces. I know he grew up in Liverpool and stuff, and he ended up. Did he have to resort to prostitution or something?
yes, he was. He and quite a lot of other people who became very successful creatives at one time or another. They were pretty much destitute when they were in London. They lived in a squat, and they had no money. Because this was how it's such a bizarre thing, but this was how it was done back then. When you were like a jobbing comedian, actor, it's what we see in like With Nail and I, you know, in lots of comedies from this era. If you were a performer of any kind or a writer, if you worked in theatre, you were on the dole and you lived where you could live, often with other actors and whatnot, in either a squat or a shared bedsit or something, and you used your money to feed yourself and then to put on your performances. And he had a very, 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 very dark time of it in London. I mean, really, like, unbelievable. It wasn't until much more recently that he actually did say that he did resort to prostitution at one time. And of course, when you read the books of blood, a lot of that becomes very evident. I mean, you read which one is it? Human Remains, is it?
Yeah. That's the one that we were going to make a film out, or not a film, a short piece out. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, Human Remains. Yeah, and I mean, the character in that is more or less autobiographical.
Yeah,
it seems. You know, that is Barker's experience of what it is to be a male prostitute in 1980s London, and it's a grim portraiture. But of course, he does come out of that era with an incredible darkness in his heart, an incredible cynicism, which informs a lot of his work. You know, it's certainly in the books of blood, and it's certainly in the Damnation game. It does change. It does shift later on. I mean, that darkness is in all of his books. There's no doubt about that. But it's later, it evolves into something else later on. Like later on, if you read Weave World or Galilee or Imagica, there is always this incredible floridness and this, as we said earlier, like a redemptive element, usually born from human imagination. He does believe very sincerely in the redemptive power of human imagination. Whereas in this book, I don't know whether he did at the time of writing, but in this book, it doesn't seem so. It's certainly not in the book, if he did.
Well, maybe I'm just trying to remember other books he wrote. So, was it Cold Heart Canyon?
Oh my God! Yeah,
that's maybe slightly less upbeat, but it's was to read that. Gosh, but that's quite clearly if memory serves right, let's say, yeah. Here's my take on Hollywood.
I think that's Barker being an absolute bitch about Hollywood, isn't it? You know, he's like, because of course by that point he's been through that whole system. He's been part of it for a long time, and he is. I mean, this again, the cynicism in that book is incredible. But I just love the way in that book he just goes for the throat. Like, he does not care at all. He goes for like the mythologized history of Hollywood, you know, the icons of Hollywood, and he says, you know what? No, they were all child abusers. They were all drug addicts. They were all, you know, they were all just involved in excremental things, and even now they're involved in excremental things. He basically takes all of the masks of Hollywood and surgically peels them away to reveal the fetid interior, the dark soul of Hollywood, and it is absolutely incredible.
It is, and I think I've answered my own question about maybe why Barker's not on the bookshelves as much as King is nowadays.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean,
the man can sell anything. I think he's ridiculously talented. But it's just interesting because you do go into stores, and it's that piece where I realise he's got a smaller selection of books, but it's that thing. It used to be whenever I was going in the 90s looking for Barker, you'd sometimes even then sort of struggle to find him within the book sort of case, whereas King would have 5 different shelves,
as it has always been, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you go into bookstores now, what you go to horror, but it's all of his books, isn't it? It's all of King's classics. I think with Barker, I mean, we discussed this on the episodes I did with Kit, but one of the problems I think with Barker is how do you market him? Because he resists, he actively refutes that very notion, right? So you've got books that could fit in horror. So you've got things like the Damnation game and the Books of Blood. Then you've got Weave World. Now, where does Weave World go? I mean, technically, it could go in fantasy. It could go in science fiction, technically. It could go in horror, certainly. There are horrific things in it. But where do you put him? I've always found that has been a problem for people with Barker. He doesn't really fit into any particular category. I do know people who like eras and periods of Barker. So I know people who like this period. They like the Books of Blood and Damnation game horror, where he's a bit more identifiably a horror writer. I know people who like his fantasy stuff primarily. So they like his Weave World, his Imagica, his Galilee. It's a difficult thing, I think. I mean, personally, I like pretty much everything he's put out. Pretty much everything. There are one or two exceptions, but pretty much everything, to be honest. He's one of those writers that I read pretty much everything they've ever published once a year, every year.
Yeah. Wow.
And every year, it just like every time I go back to him, I'm awed. It's like it doesn't become. Familiarity definitely does not breed contempt here. It really doesn't. And sometimes it makes me feel despair. I don't know about you. I read his stuff and I'm like, why am I even bothering?
Oh, that's a fair point. So I think for anyone out there who's a writer, it's just the thing. You just have to go. It's a one-off. You know, if you can emulate Clive Barker, go for it. I mean, more power to you, because that would be brilliant. I'd love to read that stuff, but at some point you have to go, learn it, read it, enjoy it, be inspired by it, pick, look at the style and everything like that. But there's a reason that he's not really been replicated over the years. It's that thing you sort of think, okay, it's definitely shifted horror in the past 30, 40 years, sort of thing. But it's that thing of I'm just thinking in my head, if who's the person out there who writes like Clive Barker?
Oh my God, I can't think of anyone out there who it fulfills quite the same criteria that Barker does, and that's because he's so determined to refute that very notion, isn't he? That's the problem. Like, I mean, I say it's a problem, it's actually a strength as well. He's not interested in being pigeonholed. Like, I mean, I remember there was an interview with Doug Bradley on one of the Hellraiser DVDs, and because of course Doug was a school friend of Clive Barker's. They've known one another since they were kids, and you know how what really like kick-started Barker's career was when Stephen King wrote that lovely endorsement of him. And it said, the one that's quoted on all the films, all the books, which is exactly that. I've seen the future of horror, and it's Clive Barker. Doug Bradley says, when he read that, he was like, I know exactly how Clive responded to that, which is he would have been very grateful. He would have found it, very obviously, because it kick-started his career. But he also would have thought, on the other hand, the hell I am. Because he's just not interested in being that. He's not interested in being the horror writer. He's not interested in being the fantasy writer. He doesn't want to be anything that can be like identified and then therefore marketed. And that makes him really problematic, obviously.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, because it's that thing of, you just look and you just kind of go, you're really talented in multiple areas, art, film, writing. And I suppose it's that thing of, so when you're writing, you put your words down and you hope it's going to connect with people and stuff, but do you sort of think, sorry, I'm realising I'm sort of whittling on here a little bit. I'm just kind of going, so as someone, when you're writing, you just want to get your words done, you want to get your story told. You mean, Barker's obviously, helped to, shape shape a genre to a degree without the intent of. I think he just went, I've got all these. I mean, I'm guessing I've never met the man. I've got no idea what his thought process is. But he's just the thing of going, I just sort of all these stories I want to tell. I'm just going to churn them out and get them out there.
Yeah, I mean, his process is really chaotic. It's really interesting. The way he talks about it, he pantses a lot. You know, he doesn't really plan what he's doing. It tends to coalesce as he's working, and he apparently, when he is working, he's very difficult to keep well because he just forgets to do stuff like eat or drink or bathe or whatever. He seals himself away and just furiously writes, and he writes longhand as well. You know, he writes everything physically. And at the end, he literally has stacks and piles and boxes of material that then have to be whittled down into the story.
So maybe that answers the question about the razor eaters. Maybe that was a pantsing thing.
Yeah, maybe so. But it works so well because it's so. It doesn't need any more elaboration. It's so resonant and strange that it kind of hooks you in anyway, and it just lends Breer just a little bit more than what he would otherwise be. You know, I mean, effectively, he is a zombie, isn't it? You know, effectively, he is a zombie. And he is one of the joyous things about this book is the relish with which Barker describes what's happening to him.
It is
because it's gross, isn't it? I mean, it's just complete body horror, right? It is essentially Barker doing Cronenbergian body horror. So he's basically saying, okay, so let's do the zombie story, but let's make it so that rather than the frank relief of the zombie not being aware of what's happening to it, of being this mindless eating machine, let's make the zombie aware. And not only aware, but polite. One of the weirdest things about Anthony is that he cares about his appearance and he cares about the way he smells, and so he does this weird thing where throughout the book he starts, as you said, applying perfumes to himself so that he doesn't smell, and he starts putting makeup on so he doesn't look so monstrous, and he starts dressing in like these very large coats and things. It's ridiculous. But it's brilliant.
It is, and it's so interesting because you were just saying with the zombie thing with Anthony, but then just thinking about the zombification of Bella, the dog, towards the end, and the puppy snuffling, snuffling at her teeth, and that's just Barker being perverse. That is Barker basically like taking, you know, it's an image of life, isn't it? You know, puppies suckling at the teat. It's an image of life. But what he's done is he's taken it and deformed it. He's basically mutilated it and turned it into something fanatic, something of death and rot and it's so good. It's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant. There are moments in this book, like you were saying, that when you read them, when you come to the images, they do make you experience these incredibly visceral reactions. I mean, I don't know why, one of the ones that always gets me, you know, when Mamoulion has Caris and he's trying to get her to use her gift because Whitehead's gone. Whitehead has gone to ground, and he's trying to force her to use her gift to locate him, and she won't. So he's basically, not only is he plying her with heroin, he's also affecting her mind. So he's making her see things that she doesn't want to see. And there's a point where she's locked in a bathroom, and he's making like something come up the sewer. He's making like filth and sewage and even worse things come up through the sewer, and it's bleh. I don't know why. That's one of the images that gets me. I don't know why. No, he's I think it's just one of those ones. Barker's just like, you know, let's if we're going to push it, let's push the boundaries. Let's go with it. Well,
he does it in every element, doesn't he? Like everything he writes about, he really is intent. I mean, like you were saying earlier, like that there are elements of like the extreme horror of like the splatterpunk about this book, as there are in most of Barker's works, and that's absolutely true. And that's, you know, not to demean those subgenres at all, because I love those subgenres. I think there's great worth in those subgenres existing. But what Barker does is that he will do that that, and then he will use your reaction to influence you and to evoke wider concepts. So he places you in this situation of emotional shock and repulsion, and then he uses that state to almost like smuggle in these grander ideas and these grander concepts. It's a very clever trick.
Well, it is, and it's that thing of, anytime you read a book, you should feel something.
Yeah.
The worst thing that can happen with any book is you read it and you kind of go, it's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just having, you're torn in many ways. So you get the repulsion, but you get the, you're obviously backing Marty as your horse here, a little bit of Karis to a degree. You're trying to work out what she's doing and stuff like that. You're not sure if you want Vermilion or Whitehead to win. We don't want either of them to win, really.
Yeah.
And it's just that. Oh gosh, sorry. As I'm talking, I'm thinking back to Toy's wife.
Oh Jesus!
Gosh,
I've forgotten about that.
I was talking, and I was just thinking about reacting to things, and they basically killed Toy's wife but keep her alive, so she's just on the phone, and
I'd forgotten all about that.
And she just sits, and she says one or two words or something like that, and she just keeps repeating it, and it's just, it's the, how can you, Toy's a secondary character. He's got a main piece in it, but literally, I was just like kind of going, right, what's the worst thing that I could do to this man? What's the one thing that he cares for in this life? His wife. Yeah. Right. So what we'll do is another zombie.
Yeah.
Another zombie.
And again, he does that awful thing of making the zombie sympathetic, right?
Yes.
Because she is aware to a degree. There is some awareness left in her of what's been done to her, right? Geez, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, to take us on to maybe sort of slightly less depressing thing, but something I don't know if you ever clocked it in the book or not, but I so I love nature, and it's one of those things where you sort of see he's very clever with the way he does time in the book, because it feels like it's quite a short period that Marty's with Whitehead, or it can do, but you look at it and he's very good in the way he gets the seasons to change. Yeah. And he just filters it in, and it's one of those things where he gets it right. And I know that sounds a very simple thing to say, but it's one of those things where if you put, I don't know, say if you had sort of pine trees that were going brown or something like that, you kind of go, well, no, they're evergreen. So I mean, that's a really basic thing, but it's that piece of he's quite clearly gone and sat down and kind of gone, right, as the seasons change, what am I looking at? What are the differences in terms of flowers and trees and wildlife and all that sort of pieces? And it shows little bits of detail that you don't really notice. And it's only because I just walk lots around the woods and everything like that. You just kind of go, he's thought about that. Yeah. And it's actually made sure that you're clocking, or theoretically clocking, and kind of go, right, Marty's actually been in the house for about 2 to 3 months.
Yes,
if anything goes wrong. So it's a very, very clever way of sort of doing it, and it's just so Marty's built that trust and that relationship, and that's the piece where Whitehead's starting to go, I'll give you some money, you can go out and you get me my strawberries, but then go gambling if you want to, and all of that sort of thing. And it's that gradual building of trust and a relationship, only for Whitehead to then break it down, and you realise that this is a game that's probably played out over about 9 months to a year within the story.
Yeah, it's a much bigger time span than it actually seems to be. And again, I imagine a part of that is just because the way Barker writes is actually quite thunderous, isn't it? It just hurtles along. It's a big old book. I mean, it is a big old fat old book, isn't it? Yeah. It's 532 pages, this copy that I've got here. My like falling apart at the seams copy that I've got in my hand now. But it doesn't feel like that. And again, that is a quality of Barker. I mean, he does write big old novels. That is generally true. But they don't feel like big old novels. I mean, like, stuff like Imagica, which I think is like separated into 4 separate books.
Yeah.
It's enormous. It's like his Lord of the Rings. It's over 1,000 pages, that one. But it's so readable.
Yeah,
it's so eminently readable, and just like we said earlier, if you're looking for an entry point to Barker, especially if you're coming in from, say, more mainstream horror, this is a really good one. This is a really good one because it's not quite as abstruse and alienating as a lot of his other work. Like, it doesn't go to the same metaphysical heights, like the hallucinogenic heights of, say, Everville or the Great and Secret Show. There's elements of that certainly towards the end when you're starting to see a little bit more of Mamoulion, like the internal life of Mamoulion, like the soul of Mamoulion. But even that it never really goes to the same places that like the Great and Secret Show or Imagica or Weave World does. So it's a good entry point. It's a good way in. It's structured a bit more traditionally as well.
Yeah, it is. It's I mean, the beats are there. You've got, you know, effectively a prologue in terms of the stuff in Warsaw. You then introduce to the characters, so you play your first act out there. You realise there's a bit of, you know, something's going on, a bit of danger. Act 2, you know, throw in the more characters and everything's going up and down a little bit, and then you're into your full-blown final third.
It's kind of familiar in an odd way, despite how abstruse and disturbing some of the imagery does get. It is actually quite familiar. It's just doing that very clever thing of giving you something familiar and then just subtly inverting it a little bit, just tweaking it a little bit to make it new, to make it intriguing. Because one thing he's definitely not interested in is, again, this is not a slight against Stephen King or anything like that. It's just that Stephen King's work is of a different kind, you know, it's of a different type, and it appeals to a slightly different audience, I think, in that regard. Whereas King is very often, certainly from this era, he is about more sort of traditional absolutes. So the monster is often the monster, and the good guy is often the good guy, and the innocents are often the innocents, and that's the way it goes. Not always, not universally, but generally I think that's true. Barker's just not interested in that at all. Like, it's very difficult when you sit down and think about it to identify who is the antagonist in this book.
Yes. It is. It's I mean, we've kicked it around for about an hour, and I think the only thing we've agreed on is that we give a damn about Marty, and everyone else is, who's pulling whose strings.
And even Marty, I mean, the only reason we give a damn about Marty is because he's been mishandled. I mean, if you met Marty outside of this situation, then you would not like him. I mean, he's not a good guy.
Well, I don't know. It's one of those ones where he's kind of, everything about him, the reason he's in prison is sort of a sympathetic. Was he the getaway driver? He knew the gambling things.
I think he was the driver, wasn't he? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I think he had some gambling debts that he needed to get rid of, and so he did a job with his friends, and he got caught, and the others did. And so it's that bit where you kind of go, "Oh, he's wrong, but he's loyal." I
mean, he's got good elements. He is loyal. Yeah. He's definitely loyal. I mean, like, his strange loyalty to Whitehead, for one thing, which Mamoulion does question at one point. He's like, you know, this guy is a cynical bastard. He's just playing with you as well. Why are you so loyal? Because he is, isn't he? You know, I mean, the reason he ultimately goes after Mamoulion at the end is out of loyalty to Whitehead. And Whitehead throws it back in his face. Whitehead is an asshole. You know, he's an awful man. I suppose it's a learning curve for Marty in many respects, isn't it?
Well, he's not that old, in it. Is he 20? Let's say not that old. He's 28, 29 or something.
Yeah, he's not massively old in it. That's for sure.
But sorry, just quickly on the age thing. It was the thing I'd forgotten, you know, and again, it's because I was reading it when I was 17, 18, that first time round. You don't really think about it. But then when you kind of go, you know, Marty, if he's like 28, 29 sort of age, and then you're going, oh, so you're sleeping with the 18-year-old daughter then, are you? Okay. Fair enough. You know, that's me being terribly prudish, I'm sure. But it was just a little bit of just kind of going, okay. And I'm not sure if she's just quite 18 or if she's 17 or 16. I can't quite remember it. It's that sort of, she's somewhere hovering around there. And I was just that little bit of rereading it this time going, yeah, okay, that's skating slightly closer.
It's skirting, isn't it? Definitely, if nothing else. I mean, I suppose you could say that she kind of initiates it. And
she does.
She is also. I mean, for her, it's not. Certainly at the beginning, it isn't about any. It really isn't about even about physical intimacy, is it, or anything like that? It's a weapon, right?
Yeah.
She's using it to oust Mamoulion, you know, in the same way, and for the same reason she uses the heroin, right?
Yeah.
It's to dampen that capacity, isn't it? Because she's quite strong, isn't she? She's kind of stronger psychically than any of the other characters, with possible exception of Mamoulion.
Yeah, definitely.
Because she can do things. She can like locate her father, and she can communicate telepathically and whatnot. And she's trying to dampen the capacity, isn't she?
Yeah, I mean that's it entirely. That's why she's on the drugs, because she just doesn't want she's to try and keep Mamoulion out, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
And thing was, but she's her father's daughter though.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of her.
No, it's entirely cynical. Certainly at the beginning. I mean, by the end, there is some genuine affection between her and Marty. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But it starts as an entirely functional, cynical exercise. That is definitely true. I mean, it is complex because she does romanticize him as well, doesn't she? Like, she sees him running, doesn't she?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. She sees him running. And because she has been caged up and cooped up and kept sedate for such a long time, he represents something new. He represents like flight and difference, something new in her life. And there's that element. But she's not that hot on him as a man, really. As a person.
Is he calling her Angel or something? Is that, or is he called her the Angel? I can't remember. One of them calls each other the Angel.
I think she calls him.
Yeah, that's
Angel, but that soon stops after she meets him. That soon stops after she meets him, because he isn't. He's not that guy. He's just not that guy. Barker has more sympathy for Marty than most in the book, but he is far from Barker's most sympathetic protagonist. That's for sure.
Maybe it's just because all the others are so
bad by comparison.
Yeah, that you kind of going, that's the shining light in the book.
Maybe that's it. That's it. I mean, there is that whole thing of him. He does feel he is like loyal to a fault, isn't he? That is, you can't take that away from him. He is loyal to a fault, and I think in the end, at the very end, isn't there something about like he is almost? It's almost like he has, or it's either Marty or Karis is almost like inherited something of Mamoulion.
Oh, I can't remember that.
Isn't there some sort of like transposition where their minds have been opened?
Karis does, if I remember.
Yeah, so there's that, I suppose. There is this notion that maybe she will do something better with it than Mamoulion did. Or not, or not. I mean, what I find fascinating about Mamoulion more than anything is that weary archaism that he's got going on, where he just doesn't care anymore, does he? Like, this is something that comes up in Barker's antagonists all the time. The weary villain, essentially, the villain who doesn't even really care anymore. They've just had enough. I mean, that's what he wants ultimately, isn't it? He wants Whitehead to come to the grave with him. Yeah.
But it's about winning the game. They're just both that. It's stubbornness. And well, it's stubborn. I think it's one of those ones where what am I going with this? I think it's that thing of he's got irritated by Whitehead, and it's become an issue. I think it's one of those ones where it's just become something that really vexes him, and that's it. And it's just a really annoying itch that he just has to scratch. And
it's the last thing he's got to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Before, it's the last affair that he's got to put the lid on, effectively. And he can't quite bring himself to just leave it. In fact, doesn't Whitehead say to him at some point, like, when he's in extremis, you could have just left me alone. You could have just gone, you know? But no, he couldn't. No, he couldn't. I mean, for one thing, he's invested too much in Whitehead by that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that is it. It literally is that. It's that thing. It's back to the power piece again. He just wants to go. I'm better than you. You're not getting away with it. Because he'd feel like just leaving Whitehead to be, then Whitehead's won.
Yeah, Whitehead has ultimately got everything that he wanted. He's leeched off of Mamoulion for this long. He's made himself rich and powerful. He's indulged every vice he possibly could, and still wants more. Still wants more life. Still wants to go on. I mean, I can quite kind of see Mamoulion's point here.
But the thing with it is if he'd just left Whitehead to be, then Whitehead's can't do anything, because once he's had to abandon Whitehead Towers. I can't remember if there's a specific name for the house, but let's call it Whitehead Towers. Once he's abandoned the big mansion and everything, and he's holed up in that derelict hotel in Edgware Road. It's just that piece of going, where's he going to go from there? Yeah. He's going to be sitting in that room for months, eating tins of baked beans or rats or whatever through. Because once he goes out and ventures into the wider world, he can't go back to the life he had.
No.
I mean, unless Mamoulion drifts away to the other side or whatever, but there's no way that he could go back to the lifestyle that he wanted, because he becomes so visible.
Yeah, it's a fair point, actually. What is he trying to do when he's escaped towards the end of the book? When he fakes his own death, doesn't he? Ultimately,
yeah.
Why? What is the plan there? Does he think Mamoulion's just going to go away?
I can't remember. I think he was just sort of thinking he could wait it out, and then that would. I can't remember now.
It's a bad plan. I mean, it's a desperate plan either way, isn't it? It's really desperate, that is. Yeah. It ain't going to work, and obviously doesn't work.
I mean, and equally, we might be overthinking this, and it might be as simple a thing as Barker writing it goes, right, I need to get to a place for a final scene, and this will be really, really good. So let's do it this way.
It could be that. Yes, it could just be that.
Maybe the curtains were just blue.
Maybe that could just be that. But yeah, it is a fascinatingly complex relationship that you've got going on there. And the fact that it is so ambiguous, it's so incredibly ambiguous. Again, it's not something that you get from many of Barker's contemporaries writing at the same time in the same sort of genre and type of literature. There is a tendency for the villains to be the villains, the monsters to be the monsters, and the saints to be the saints, and that's it. By the end of the story, there'll be a few casualties along the way, but the monster will ultimately be slain, the demon will be banished or exorcised, and the innocent will walk away okay. Just doesn't happen here. And in fact, even those characters who are built up as being semi-mythic, so essentially Whitehead and Mamoulion, Barker takes absolute glee in giving them the most ignominious ends imaginable, doesn't he? I mean, his contempt for Whitehead is very clear by the end.
Yes. There's no heroic, noble death or anything that happens.
No, even after Whitehead's death, I mean, there's a final ignominy, isn't there? There is literally someone excreting on his corpse at the end.
Yeah. Well, that's the fair-haired Jehovah, isn't it?
Yeah. That's absolutely it. Yeah, that's like the depths that it's come to at that point. Mamoulion, of course, ends up being hacked to bits by Bria, and turns into basically is still alive in that condition. Mm-hmm. Whether he'll ever be able to pull himself together again, who knows? So there's no good ending here. There's no balance. There's no redress here, and Barker does that very deliberately. Very deliberately.
Yeah. And it works, and it's one of those ones you get to the end of it, and you're a bit, because you don't need to have a joyous fanfare or anything at the end. It's just, Karis and Marty carry on living.
They get out. Yeah, they are damaged, traumatized, but they do get out. But the others, this epic game that's spanned from the end of World War II up to the present day, has just come to nothing. But filth and excrement, with all of its games and all of its miracles even, has come to nothing. It's a cold, dark, and very powerful ending, darkly powerful ending, and I kind of love it.
Yeah, no, I do. I think that's what works for me with it. I quite like bleak stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, hence the genre we both But it's that thing of, you know, sometimes you get the bit that ends nicely, but it's just, I don't know. I think it's just there's it's the bit of the world where you go, you know, this is gritty. This is this is how life is for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, horror is so well placed for it as well, isn't it? You know, there are other formats and genres of literature that can do the other stuff, that can take you into ascended places, but it is worth experiencing vicariously via literature, via video games, via whatever medium you like, these depths of the human soul. It is worth it. It does allow you to sort of develop your contexts a little bit. And I love the fact that Barker is basically saying to the reader, look, these experiences and these emotions are worthwhile. They're not something to shy away from necessarily. They're something to experience and understand. And this is what this fiction is for. I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah, no, he's excellent at that. And I think I'm just sort of thinking as we were talking, you know, going back to some of the stuff you were saying about the ambiguity and the pieces where he sort of flips things, and it's like the monsters are sometimes the good guys and sometimes not, and all of that. I remember it. Oh, what was it? It was with Cabal. He's either talking about Nightbreed or Cabal. I can't remember if he's talking about the book or the film. But he's basically saying, look, he wanted to, you know, have the monsters as the heroes within that, as, you know, just flip the trope to a degree.
Yeah,
and it's you know, it's that thing of going, you know, the monsters are this hidden underground society, and you know, again, are the book curtains blue, or is it deeper than that sort of thing? You know, is it one of those ones where it's, you know, it's very much a commentary on society, and you know, and the poorer masses and stuff who are sort of like living, having to live out of sight, and all of those sort of pieces. So I don't know, but
I think absolutely. I think you're absolutely right there, because like in Cabal, it's very stark in Cabal. What he does there is all the forces that are generally promoted as being of order and therefore of stability and goodness are actually malevolent and violent and oppressive. So police forces, of course, one of the main villains is a psychologist. Forces of society, effectively, they are all malevolent in Cabal, whereas the entities that literally live in the graveyard, like under the graveyard, the monsters under the graveyard, are living miracles. It's a really clever inversion, and it works very, very well. I think it's a bit more ambiguous in this one, but it is definitely there.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, the difference here is you don't have the miracles, or rather you have the miracles, but they're not even worth celebrating. They're just darkness and filth and horror.
Yeah, I mean, just think what Mamoulian, I mean, you've alluded to it earlier in the conversation, just think what Mamoulian could have done with that power.
Well, if he were a better man.
Yeah.
If he were a man of more imagination and passion. I think even Whitehead accuses him of this at some point. You know, like he's this dusty, dry old patrician creature who could have remade the world. He could have remade the world with the power that he's got, and he doesn't. He doesn't. He lives vicariously through other people, and then he gets bored of them and he abandons them, or they abandon him and end up dead. And there's a very unpleasant commentary, and like a misanthropic commentary going on in Mamoulian. What is it he calls himself? It's the last European?
The last European, yeah.
That's right, the last European, which is obviously an affectation and also garbage, you know. It's complete garbage. It gives him a motif at the beginning of the story. It gives him a certain element of the mythic. But like Bria with his Razor Eater stuff, it's complete garbage, as we learn.
It's tribes, isn't it?
Yeah, he's not. They're
talking about we're the last of our tribes.
Which is not true, you know. I mean, it's for Anthony, it's almost certainly a complete delusion. He never was part of a tribe to begin with, and Mamoulion, it's an affectation. It's a pretension. It doesn't mean anything. It's just because he believes that somehow some ideal of the world has passed on, has like withered or degraded around him, and he just can't bear the world as it is now. But then again, he's the kind of man who would never be satisfied anyway, with whatever shape the world was in. It's why he can't be satisfied with being a miracle maker, for God's sake, for doing the most incredible things. He isn't satisfied with that either.
No, he's not. And I'm just thinking, as we sort of trying to think what satisfies him, and it's so we were introduced to him as the card player, and you get you get the thing of you've got all these other people who've gone to play cards with him before, and they've all come off badly. They've all lost to him, and what have you. You're just sort of thinking, what's the forfeits that have occurred to them? How many bodies are there? Well, what's underneath the white tree?
What's underneath the white tree? Yeah, exactly. Which we get glimpses of course. So they're probably some of the most disturbing images in the book, to be honest.
So it's one of those ones with the white tree. I'm just trying to think if it says it about in the book or not. But is this just an image that Mamoulion projects to Whitehead to control him, to sort of say, this is where you'll end up if you don't stick with me? Or has he really drawn the souls there?
Oh, is it real? Like, is it an actual? Is it like the manifestation of this metaphysics? I think it is real. I do think it's almost like it's never explained exactly what it is. The book never ever sits you down and like with exposition has characters saying, yes, this means this and this means that. But it's hinted that it's almost like the symbolic manifestation of Mamoulion, of like his soul. That's what he is inside, this old, rotten white tree with nothing growing on it.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be a kicker if it was just an illusion that Mamoulion had done?
God, that'd make it even worse, wouldn't it? In a way.
I think you're probably right, but it would just be an absolute kicker if you're Whitehead and the thing you've been really, really scared of all that time.
He's nothing. Just another illusion, right? Wow, cripes. That would make it even more squalid somehow, wouldn't it? Even more wretched.
Oh, God.
Absolute brilliance. I mean, I think we've wrung that one to the nth degree, to be honest, Phil. Do you have any closing statements or thoughts on the Damnation game?
I think it is one of the... Okay, so the last thoughts are, it's an amazing book. It's an amazing piece of writing, amazing piece of art. It's one of the, and equally, you're sitting down and kind of going, how the fuck was that a first?
I know, right? You almost hate him, don't you? You have moments. I spoke to Kit about this when we were doing Imagica. His capacity for not only conceiving of ideas and images and concepts, but naming them.
Yeah,
he somehow gets it bang on. He somehow has that capacity for hitting it just correctly, and you think to yourself when you come, you utter bastard, leave something for the rest of us,
But equally, it's that stuff which has inspired many people to write and stuff like that. I mean, I sure know I picked up a pen after it.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reason I write is because of Barker. There's no doubt. There's just no ambiguity about that at all.
But it's that thing of kind of going. So as a book, it's brilliant. It is that thing. So the short synopsis is brilliant book. Mm-hmm. Go into it knowing that you're going to feel squeamish at some points, more than likely. I know there'll be some people out there who'll kind of go, no, that's fine. I don't feel squeamish, whatever. Good for you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, but it's the thing going. It's so well crafted, and it's actually that's the thing with it. The characters are well drawn. That's the thing that I care about within any books. It's the piece of going the town and everything else. They're backdrops, they're important backdrops, etc. But it's so character driven. And you thinking it through. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main characters. Really,
it's not a massive cast, is it? Really?
Yeah, and that and that's testament, I think, to the ability, as a writer, to write such strong characters that they will carry you through that entire 500 and whatever 30 odd pages, and do that really, really well.
And none of them are shortchanged. Like, none of them are shortchanged. Every single one of them gets to where they're going, and they have a part to play, like a sincere part to play in the story. It's very clever. It's very clever stuff.
Yeah. So it's one of those ones. I realise we spoiled the crap out of it, so apologies. If you've not read it, go and read it.
Absolutely.
If you have read it, go and reread it. Especially if you're not ready for a few years, because it will it ticks so many boxes, and I don't know. I've been struggling to read at any pace over recent years. I think it's just getting older and tired and stuff like that, and life pressures. But this I rattle through it. And I think it's just that thing of it didn't feel, as you sort of said, it doesn't feel like a 500-page book. It feels like it's a solid 300 and something. But it's just really good. I mean, George, your last thoughts on this?
Oh, goodness. As I said earlier, what I would say is if you are coming at Barker maybe for the first time, or if you're not entirely familiar with his work, this is one of the best, alongside the Books of Blood. But even the Books of Blood, it can get more abstruse than this, actually. I would say this is an excellent entry point. It is a superb entry point. It's hard. It's a bizarre thing to say that it's kind of softer than a lot of his other work, but in certain ways it is. Like in terms of the metaphysics, the more abstruse ideas, even the imagery, it's more based in a kind of familiar reality, and certainly a familiar tradition of fiction, than a lot of his other work. That is not to say that it is not wildly experimental, because it is, and incredibly successful in those experiments as well. It serves almost, it's in its own dark way, as a kind of lampooning of the kind of horror fiction that was around at the time, that was pervasive at the time. And shows, at the same time, it reveals all of these new facets of what this kind of horror is capable of, in terms of, it doesn't have to be just one thing. It doesn't have to be just the disturbing imagery. It doesn't have to be just the visceral sense of repulsion or arousal or whatever it makes you feel. It can be all of those things and more. That's kind of what Barker's trying to give you here. He's trying to he's being very generous to his readers in many respects, and he's also not treating them with disrespect. This book is a genre book, definitely, and it exemplifies the genre in which it operates, but it is also far beyond that. It's far beyond any specification or parameter that you might assume of what that genre is, and therefore enhances your appreciation of it. It is a phenomenally successful piece of work. And what I find really interesting, there are dedicated Kindle downloads for almost all of Barker's work. There isn't for this.
Oh, they're not?
No. I was really surprised. I was looking at his page on the Evil Empire of Amazon, and almost all of his books are on there, but this isn't. You can't download this for your Kindle. I'm like, that's a crying shame. That's a crying shame, because I would sincerely want this book available in every format it could be available, so that people have access to it.
I don't know. Why wouldn't it be on Kindle? I can't even imagine.
I honestly don't know. And also the hard copies that do exist on Amazon are rather expensive. I don't know why that would be. I don't know what the reason for that is, because it is a beautiful book. And also, I mean, it's important in Barker's milieu as well, because it's not it is the first novel, isn't it? Because The Hellbound Heart, although it came earlier, is a novella technically.
Novella, yeah.
This is the first Clive Barker novel, so this is what set him on that course. From this comes Weaveworld, from this comes The Great and Secret Show, from this comes Everville, from this comes Imagica, My God, that incredible bibliography starts here.
Has anyone ever tried to adapt, or have they made the Damnation game as a film or anything?
You know what? I was thinking about this earlier before we came on. They haven't, and that amazes me. It amazes me because, Barker's other stuff is very difficult to adapt. I do not envy anyone who comes to the likes of Imagica and tries to adapt that. I just don't know how you do it. This is totally adaptable. Can you imagine, this is absolute wish listing, impossible stuff that will never happen. But can you imagine if like Mike Flanagan or someone like that got a hold of this and did a series of it?
Yeah. That would work. Yeah, it would work. You could work it as a 10-parter, couldn't you?
Right. It would a limited series that has a definite beginning, middle, and end. I think it would work brilliant. It would work as a film as well. You could could easily condense this down into like a film, and it would work beautifully. It really. I am so surprised that it was the Hellbound Heart that was adapted first, because that has way more abstruse imagery in it than this does. Yeah, I'm just surprised because it would work so well. It is kind of filmic, isn't it? It's kind of cinematic in the way that it works. So yeah, I'm just shocked that it's never been done. I never attempted even.
I'm sure. I mean, you imagine there's probably been a lot of people put suggested scripts into Hollywood or wherever to sort of try and do it, but obviously it's fallen. I mean, maybe not, but I'd be surprised if someone hasn't at least sort of kind of.
It may be Barker himself, because I know that he is phenomenally protective of his IPs. He is phenomenally protective. After, have you ever seen the film adaptation of Rawhead Rex?
No.
So bad. It is so bad. After that happened, Barker went on like a bit of a crusade and basically got the film rights to all of his work, so nobody can adapt it without his say so.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. Maybe that's the reason. But as you say, it's one of those ones. It's got a classic, classic three-act beat to it almost. So you could just do it quite readily. You can look away at some of the more extreme pieces or cut them out, or whatever you want to do with it. Depends how mainstream you want to make the film, but
it's so visual as well, isn't it? You get such a visual sense of the characters and the places and the settings. You could see even like how they would film the story. It works so well. It's almost storyboarded in your head when you read it.
Yeah, I'm writing the script as in my head as we're talking at the moment. So I may have a package to send off to Mr. Barker.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
You're not touching my work, son of you.
It's such a shame, though. I mean, I know it's a difficult thing to do. Barker's very difficult to adapt at the best of times, but there's stuff in his stories that has never been seen in like horror cinema and horror television before. I would love to see it done, and done well.
Because they did. I was trying to think. They did. Oh, Lord of Illusions.
They did. Yes, which is from The Last Illusion from the Books of Blood.
That was yes.
I mean, it's a fun film. If you watch the director's cut, it's actually pretty fun. It's flawed, but it is fun. It's got its moments. It's still not there. You know what I mean? It's not quite as baked as I would like it to be. But it is an interesting film, and it's wildly experimental.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. That's got to be 25 years ago that came out.
Yeah,
I'm showing my age now. Bloody hell.
Is quite an old one now. Yeah, it is. And there hasn't been. I mean, there have been some adaptations. There is an adaptation of Dread knocking about there. That's not very good at all. I
think I started to watch it, and it was on the Horror Channel one evening, and I think I watched about 20 minutes and I just wasn't grabbing me. It wasn't to say it's bad or not. I don't know. I just wasn't getting.
It's just not very good. Sadly, there's the adaptation of the Midnight Meat Train with Vinnie Jones. That's not very good either. There's the Candyman, obviously, which is based on the Forbidden, which is excellent. The original Candyman is stunner of a film, absolute stunner of a film. But there are not as many successful adaptations of Barker's work, and a lot of it is to do with Barker's work itself. It is very difficult to adapt, almost by its nature. But if you're going to do it, this one it's a gift almost, isn't it? It's waiting there to be adapted.
There you go. Maybe that's our closing ask from the podcast. It's like, someone go out there, do an amazing job of adapting this. It deserves to be out there on the screen.
Agreed, absolutely. Yeah, the closing statement, the closing plea. Whoever's out there, if someone with contacts or influence out there is listening, please adapt Clive Barker's Damnation game. We would be very, very happy. And with that, is there anything you'd like to pimp out while we're here, Phil?
We'll tell you what. If anyone's not read my stuff, I tend to write dark psychological horror. People seem to like it. It's not going to be that happy in terms of endings, but
we've reviewed some of it on this channel, guys. We have.
You did. You were very kind. So if you want to look at any books, Broken on the Inside is a collection. Leverkant's as a novella, or Becoming David as a novella. Give one of those a shot, and hopefully you'll enjoy.
Excellent. Links below, by the way, ladies and gents, to all of those. For myself, same as usual, you can find me knocking about here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel, doing conversations like this and let's plays and whatever takes my fancy, really. In terms of my published work, you can find links to it all over at strangeplaygrounds.com. Most recently, the second volume of Born in Blood, collection of short stories with an overarching mythology, and also a short story published in the collection The Book of Queer Saints, which I'm really, really, really proud and pleased about, I've got to say. Beyond that, ladies and gents, if you fancy coming and chatting, you can come and chat to me over at Twitter. And with that, Phil, thank you so much. This has been a blast. It really has.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, George. And it's been fun.
If there's anything else you fancy chatting about, hit me up, let me know, and we'll schedule a time, yeah?
Perfect. Sounds brilliant. Cheers, man.
Brilliant. Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.